Just started the recording. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to see you here. I know that everyone is very busy. If you're an academic or student, you have quite a lot of submissions, and also practitioners are pretty busy at this time. But anyway, thank you so much. For the beginning, I would like to start our meeting by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which I'm currently situated, which is Western Australia. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and recognize their continuing connection to the land, water, and culture. For those of you who have just joined us in this series of talks, my name is Parisa Izzat-Panahi. I am an associate professor at Curtin University. It's with great pleasure to say that 5 years ago, this time, it was basically May 2019, I initiated ArchiTalks with the hope to basically create this forum to converse the architectural knowledge between those people in the built environment who are interested in, built environment as a whole. So today is the anniversary, and feel very happy to be here with you. And of course, it's a great pleasure that Jose Ricardo Sousa from Grimshaw, he is a Grimshaw principal, is with us today. I'm very glad Jose finally responded positively to my several invitations. He's a very busy man. Quite a lot of important works happening at Curtin. So he's with international experience, having worked across London and Sydney studios. He's been involved across a diverse range of projects, different scales, including landmark commissions, such as the AELTC Wimbledon Master Plan, Duxford Imperial War Museum Vision, the Pontio Arts and Innovation Centre for the University of Bangor, or the North London Heat and Power Project. In 2016, Jose Ricardo relocated to Australia, working nationally and internationally on proposals for the Sydney Metro Martin Place, Shenzhen Science and Technology Centre, Hong Kong Science and Technology, and Cockle Bay Park redevelopment. Currently, Jose is delivering the Curtin University B316 Science Building in Perth, Western Australia, in our campus. So I am hoping that Jose could possibly host a few of our classes and student groups for site visits along your project. I think we'll be coordinating with you later. But thank you. Hand it over to you, Jose, please.
Thanks, Parisa. Thanks for your kind words. Never had kind of my life presented back to me a little bit like that's quite interesting. Thanks for that. I might share my screen now. Let me just see if I can do it correctly with this system.
Sure.
Entire screen. Let me know if that comes through. Whilst it's loading, Parisa, thank you for organizing. It's a great pleasure to be here and to prepare this. A word of warning, I was just saying to Parisa before, I fall into the bad habit of just putting too much content together. So I'm probably going to be quite fast running through these, and leave some time for discussions. But I'll do my best to be, as clear, as helpful as possible. The invitation, I think, from Parisa, I know kind of last year I couldn't make it. I think this is a really timely moment to do this talk, and thank you for this. And I'll show just a little bit of B316, the project we're doing now. Of course, it's still ongoing. But when you provide this invitation, I thought that was really interesting to talk about a lot of the experience and approach in education and learning environments that Grimshaw has brought in over the years that are really embodied in the B316 project, which I think reveals a lot of the thinking that occurred before B316 and then really supports, I think, this quite incredible opportunity that B316 is for Bentley. Um, and so in doing that, the proposition for today is really to talk about an approach to learning environments and how Grimshaw has done that globally in a collaborative environment across multiple locations internationally, and how these have considered current trends and considerations for learning environments. And I want to do that through case studies, but also propositions for futures, and some of them which are obviously about advocacy. So a mix of realized experience and propositional design. So there's really two parts to this slide deck. One is a short introduction, which is about a premise of, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities at the moment, and a second part which will go through some of those case studies in a series of themes. A little bit about Grimshaw, and I think why this is important is about the collaboration piece. Grimshaw is an architectural design partnership with studios across the globe, but we really work very much in a network of studios which collaborate, and that allows us to bring that knowledge together and use that as a platform for innovation. And that's been really successful, particularly, I think, in the field of learning and education, particularly higher education and research, has been a really fruitful and rich portfolio, which has built systematically upon different innovations to come up with very site-specific, very sensitive solutions, but that progressively evolved the thinking in terms of learning environments. And that's been the result of great collaboration. And going back to the origins of Grimshaw as a practice, it was interesting that learning and education project was really the very first project by Nicholas Grimshaw, the founder of the practice. And that, I think, it's a wonderful story, really sets the tone for Grimshaw as a practice, as in ethos and principles. The project was about the integration of amenities onto student housing in the center of London, a series of terrace houses. And the solution, which is a great banner for ingenuity and innovation, was to create a services tower which would be attached to the existing buildings and have this ramp that moved around the services and allowed this continuous movement and supporting all the different levels for the student housing. So a really clever solution which built in the principles of technology, modularity, social organization, culture, and of course, high tech integrated into a narrative setting in a sensitive response. So I think for me, this is an example of how that thinking has really inspired us, and it's still today very much how we like to, look and collaborate with clients in terms of bringing in innovative solutions to projects. And through that process, of course, I mentioned clients. I think all of these examples that we show are really the benefit and privilege of collaborating with great, ambitious clients and innovative briefs. It really starts from the beginning, and having these clients supporting and really sharing and championing these ideas forwards. It needs to be a process of collaboration to deliver true innovation. This is a really kind of interesting time, I think, on all aspects for society, but I think as well for learning. We know we are at a pivotal time of change. We've seen the first decades of the 20th century really having changes in terms of our society and in terms of how we interact with each other and how we live with each other. These challenges and opportunities that we're seeing, from a demographic diversification to technological advances, are having an impact on all aspects of our lives. We know that learning institutions and learning environments that we design today are going to have to respond to a future that we can barely manage So they're going to have to be highly flexible, highly adaptable to be able to respond to a pedagogy and a future curriculum that needs to be quite adaptive. Some of this data precedes COVID, but I think a lot of it is still very relevant. We know that the changes in the way that the future work will occur is going to be quite different from the linear process that we had so far. So we expect that in the future, we're going to be changing career a lot more. We're going to be retraining a lot more. We're going to be moving a lot more. The new generation will be much more mobile, much more flexible than we've been so far. And this has a reflection on all aspects of our environment. The drivers for this change are well known. Of course, we have better healthcare. There's a mainstream of AI in everyday life. We are much more connected, and there's a whole new ecology for the way we interact with media, but also with each other. This hasn't really changed. In fact, it has been accelerated by COVID, see climate emergency, mainstream of artificial intelligence, and cost of living crisis. All of these trends that we've seen before are actually coming in much faster to our everyday lives. The skills that we're going to need for future work, of course, are going to be very different. We're going to move on from an accumulation of knowledge, which was quite a traditional 20th century type of knowledge, to a much more eye-horizon skill and be much more creative, problem solving, emotional intelligence, and ethical reasoning. Of course, a lot of this thinking is already being introduced in the curriculum of universities, and we need our environments, learning environments, to also support those. In terms of how our life is organized, of course, this has a great influence in terms of our work environment and our learning environments. We're moving on from a model where we used to learn and then work and then retire into something which is much more fluid. And we jumped completely the model of retraining and reworking, and we're going into a much more continuous, lifelong learning process where we're going to be through our life, retraining and adapting our work at every aspect and every stage of our life. Now, what that means is that the environments we work in which we learn in, are going to be influenced by each other in a much more direct way. In the past, we would have seen learning environments looking for workplace for clues and how they organize their pedagogy and their curriculum. We think now there's a need to be much more collaborative, and that the learning is going to bring innovations forward that are going to be directly connected to the way that we work. So we're going to see almost a reversal of that relationship. And of course, we're meeting online today, and we're talking about this just before the meeting, and people obviously have different preference in terms of how they meet. And of course, COVID brought in quite a lot of content which expanded accessibility of learning across geographies and across time zones. But at the same time, that abundance of knowledge also brought in a great need for face-to-face contact and, importantly, the delivery of really unique and meaningful learning experiences. All of these things and lots of others which are not covered here bring many questions and many challenges for educational facilities, particularly universities. In terms of student enrollment, retention of students, and of course, continuing their career through research. There's a reduction of population and therefore affecting funding. There's a global competition for reputation, but also the shifting poles of attraction for international students as that movement migrates from region to region. Now, that has a very direct impact in terms of the spatial requirements for universities. We're going to have to accommodate different means of learning and different means of pedagogy. We're going to need a lot more collaboration spaces, maker spaces, research and innovation hubs. We need more flexible spaces that can accommodate changing functions. And universities have a growing need to deal with their estate and managing their estate in a way that not only safeguards their long-term viability, but also allows them to be converted and adapted for different uses as the needs will change and evolve. So some of these considerations, I'd like to run through case studies looking in terms of our experience and how in the past we have dealt with it in collaboration with our clients, but also how then that starts to inform some thinking into the future. So I've grouped these into 5 themes. They deal with diversity and responsiveness, which are really about flexibility and adaptability of learning environments. The living campus, how transforming existing estates and managing an approach to campus planning. Inter and transdisciplinary spaces, so spaces for innovation and collaboration. Sustainable and regenerative design, of course, which is about the resilience of all of our institutions, and the creation of learning communities, which is about the social culture of these learning environments. Start with learning cultures and the recognition that learning is really a really social process, and we need to cater and promote these learning communities, which involve not only students, staff, but everyone who is affected or that interacts with the learning environment. We know that if environments are successful from a social point of view, that has real benefits in terms of how students are engaged and how successful the learning experience is in the university. And that means that we need to be looking at groups of learning communities, but we also need to be looking at the needs of the individuals. First project is for Duke University. It's a student campus for life. And the real objective here was to bring the student life into the heritage side of the campus and to make that the communal heart of community life. That project really looked into fostering communities and the habitation of the heart of the campus and connection of that communal life to the site and the heritage place of the building. It looked into converting and the adaptive reuse of an existing quad and introducing a new element at the center, which opened up the fabric and brought in multiple streams of spaces into that building so as to bring these different communities together. By doing that, it inverted the relationship that the historic buildings had, which were really closed off and not very porous to the community, and introduced a completely light field atrium that allowed the interaction of students with the center of the building and with the place. This created a number of multiple connections, both visual and physical, that try to bring the spaces together and really bring the different groups into one communal heart. The success of this project was, of course, that people started to inhabit the different spaces and finding all different areas of communal interaction and therefore bringing these groups together. And in doing so, the building there became really an exemplification of the historic tradition of the campus and the communal groups that come together in that student union. The second example case study is in a similar way related to an adaptive reuse of an historic building, in this case in the center of London for the London School of Economics. Now, this building had a dual use that it was obviously delivering a learning environment for the London School of Economics, but it also a signifier for the presence of the university on campus. And it faced onto the internal kind of Lincoln's Inn Field and also to the road, and it had a central street connecting through it. And in this heritage fabric, there was the introduction of an internal street that connects both sides of the building. And at the heart of the building, the creation of a communal space for social interaction. This space was really an open area that tried to bring in all the students together, and this very significant transformation of the fabric attempted to bring all the workplace and all the learning communities into one single space that was open, vertically, light filled, and quite innovative in terms of its collaboration principles. The adaptive reuse of the facility reused most of the fabric, and that obviously had great benefits from a sustainability point of view and allowed that the building delivered an excellent BREEAM rating at that time. So it became a real signifier in terms of how these heritage facilities can be transformed to create collaborative spaces for a multitude of communities. These ideas obviously been translated to many projects, and we've explored that further in some of the propositions in the way that architecture then involves landscape, nature, and also a human-centered design into its structure. We had a proposition for the border of Hong Kong and Shenzhen, which runs along the Shenzhen River. And this was to be an innovation and research campus, which included learning in a building that were meant to be the gateway for this campus in a very sensitive ecological setting. And the proposition really tries to bring together the human-centered design with the interaction with nature. Now, the way we approached that gateway was not only a gateway to the campus, but a gateway to nature itself, and that the proposition would be to extend that design to capture interactions with the ecological areas, with transport hubs, and with the campus itself. And by doing that, pulling these streams of nature and of transport into a flow that um, goes through the building and creates a journey of collaboration as users come and access the campus and the building. And that includes a very kind of idea of biophilic design in wellness, not only for the external spaces, but also for the internal spaces, so that we can open the spaces of the building and have great natural light, indoor air quality, natural ventilation, and an integration of nature into all of the aspects of the building, so that we bring in nature inside through the research and learning spaces. This allows the exploration of a net zero strategy of energy uses, embodied carbon, but primarily operational energy, so that we're creating an environment for well-being and efficiency throughout the building. The second topic is about the diversity and responsiveness of our environments. And the main theme is really about how can learning environments be adaptable and flexible in a permanent state, noting that we don't know really how the future of learning environments will evolve. There's a great example here, which is a wonderful story about the Herman Miller factory, which is a Grimshaw project from 1977 and is then converted to the Bath Spa School of Art and Design in 2019. It's a really fantastic approach from the client and a very visionary brief written in 1976, which was all about providing a culture and an environment of adaptability and collaboration. And when the Bath Spa University wanted to create the new School of Design and they reviewed the brief from 1976, it was completely aligned with their values, and therefore we had the same brief of flexibility and adaptability working for an industrial building and for a School of Design. The original building was designed around a very flexible structure which could accommodate the different requirements for the industrial process, and a facade which would be completely modularized and could adapt for the opening of light to the changing functions internally. The services were all integrated at a high level, which meant that the adaptation of the internal uses through the services, through the facade, and the large span allowed Herman Miller to occupy and adapt the use of that building for 40 years with great success. So when that changed, or when that function changed, all of those principles of flexibility were already codified into the structure, and therefore the use of the design school, which included workshops, communal spaces, shared spaces, and social spaces, could readily occupy those in a similar manner. So the building introduced a series of workshops at its base, from heavy to light workshops, a new mezzanine area, and a rooftop pavilion for presentation and lecture space at the top. Now, the purpose was not only to retain the majority of the building, but also to ensure that the future of the building remained as flexible so that it can continue to be adapted, it continue to be reused even before this second iteration. Some of the key adaptations were really critical. Of course, all of the main structure and infrastructure was retained, but there was a new roof introduced above the existing structure, which allowed the introduction of roof lights, which bring in natural light into the deep floor plate, and the introduction of a new mezzanine, which gives this great visual interaction between spaces at multiple levels. The adaptable facade system is retained and improved, of course, improving its insulation and acoustic levels, and introducing a new internal lining that supported the internal uses for pin-up and acoustic isolation of different spaces. The services were laid out modular in the ceiling, in the soffit space, similar to the existing strategy in this case, with a plug-and-play system, which was running on a modular grid. And this allowed the reconfiguration of spaces which are adaptable for different uses. And therefore, on a grid of 2.5 meters, partitions can be moved and changed to create different types of spaces, which can be from more enclosed and more private to more open and collaborative in a simple plug-and-play manner. The success of the building has been fantastic from the university point of view, which they have a great level of adaptability in their space, and therefore they can occupy and change the way that they use the building in the future, very much how Herman Miller did it in its factory use. So this, for us, is a great example of how buildings retain their value and can be seen as a resource, which is a great approach to a sustainable and regenerative design. The second example, in terms of flexible spaces, has to do with a kit of parts approach to the learning environment. This was an approach very much embedded into the design for the Arthur Phillip High School in Parramatta, New South Wales. In this case, a vertical campus was a requirement in its urban environment. The primary goal was to release the ground plane, which is obviously constrained being an urban environment, and create a vertical campus of multiple adaptable spaces. This responded very directly to the changing pedagogy of the learning institution. So we're moving from what was a linear timetable, of course, with a very structured day in terms of students moving from class to class, to a project-based learning, which of course becomes a much more fluid and much more collaborative environment. And therefore, from a cellular classroom environment, there was a need to create much more collaborative, independent, and reconfigurable spaces. The approach to that was coming from also from a very social side, of course, looking at the communities and knowing that in a vertical campus, there are going to be challenges in terms of promoting and creating those communities. So the response was about to breaking down those communities into smaller communities, which would relate to the number of people and the number of relationships that are supported by an individual. And each of those communities was then housed or inhabit what we're calling a home base, which was a mix of spaces from cellular spaces, studio spaces, to open learning areas and social areas, which would form a home base. And these home bases, which would be organized into different year groups, could then be stacked in a vertical arrangement, and that will become the primary home for each of these communities, therefore minimizing the needs for vertical movement and promoting the relationships within that particular home base and community. That model then became a 17-story building in double height warehouse type environment, which could accommodate different learning styles, but also the needs of the different year groups and the different elements within the school. So that almost became like a school within a school model. The building itself is, of course, of a modular framework, and its components are allowed to come in and support each of the framework and infrastructure of the building. For example, lifts, stairs, and toilets are added to a perimeter circulation. The home base itself includes a number of open spaces and cellular spaces, and they accommodate different types of learning types, either from studio, seminar spaces, kitchen areas, social areas, and so on, to form a fully organized ecosystem for each home base. So one home base would therefore include the variety of spaces and be stacked in terms of different groups and into double height areas. And it all started with a simple module of a generic learning space, which was adapted for the standards of the education department and added for circulation to be able to be worked in multiple learning modes. Models could be adapted to provide different learning modes, or it could be added for different types of collaborative environments or double or quadruple learning, open learning areas. In addition to that, or supported by that, there was a kit of parts family, which allowed the creation of an adaptation of multiple environments. And there were different types of kit of parts. There were, of course, the learning models, which could be combined. There was the super furniture, which are obviously large elements, which are not movable day to day, but can be adapted. And they included like library area, amphitheaters, tiered seatings, and so on. And there were smaller elements which could be adapted on a day to day of loose furniture, which could be moved. This permitted that the different home bases can be configured in different ways and can be supporting different types of curriculum and different types of pedagogy throughout the different learning stages. In between the home bases, STEAM levels offer the specialized facilities which are shared between all the home bases, and therefore one community would be inhabiting their home base for most of the day, and they could move in for specialized classes, and therefore not having to rely on vertical movements throughout the day. The building, of course, is then used as a learning tool by exposing most of its services, by allowing a great degree of user control in its environment in terms of the way that data is received and exposed throughout the building. So this becomes a really radical model in terms of the approach to the vertical campus, and one that supports a number of different and evolving pedagogies in the learning environment. Some of these ideas were then explored further in the approach to the Technology Innovation Campus on Shenzhen, where the exploration was to move from what is a traditional workplace model to a next generation collaborative workplace. And here there was the proposition of expanding this kit of parts, modularity and flexibility to what is a mega floor plate of large dimensions, which could allow manufacturing and learning and workplace and research in the same environment, and create what is a productive landscape of a super floor, which could be have a very collaborative environment in the center, and then a series of shared vertical collaborative spaces on the outside. And this then expanded and included a series of specialized laboratories, which could create a campus of research and innovation. How am I doing for time, Parisa?
10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay. I might need to go a bit fast. I know this is going quite fast paced.
Sure.
The next theme is really about considering the campus, and the trend for obviously the university campus particularly has been about a growing diversification and integration of different aspects, not only of university, but the bringing in of different uses from urban life, such as business partnerships and community, so that the future of the campus is really about a greater integration with the city. And this obviously offers a number of opportunities, but also a number of challenges in terms of dealing with the existing estates, and obviously the cost of maintaining and delivering new facilities in these campus. So the opportunity exists as well for the consideration of new and innovative typologies, which start to bring environments of collaboration and of different uses into new buildings. Two examples here in terms of campus, which I'll run through quickly. The first one is an example of delivering a master plan over 10 years and all of the different facilities within it for an innovation campus for the University of Southampton. The university wanted to create a new university campus, which was bringing in business in partnership with the university. And a decision was made rather than to reuse or adapt the existing facilities, to create a series of buildings which could be delivered in a phased manner and could be adapted whilst the delivery was happening. So the real challenge here was to create a philosophy that could work across different stages that allowed the collaboration of the industry with the university. So this idea of buildings in the landscape emerge where the different phases would be delivered. And this includes a variety of buildings, from an engineering center to a business center to an infrastructure lab with large civil engineering tables to a large hydro tank for experience. The real benefit here was to bring at the same time business and universities sharing and resources, but also sharing the knowledge being created. so that the buildings would allow this sharing of knowledge to coexist, and students and staff would benefit from this co-location. Well, the university would benefit from real life examples from industry, and of course the business partner would have access to cutting edge research happening at the same time. So this really brought in that model throughout its different stages in a great success. The second example, in a similar way, brought in the idea of the University of Cambridge seeking to consolidate all of its facilities for the engineering department. In this case, there are very particular drivers for the way this was being done. And primarily it was the need that the different facilities or the different divisions that were being brought together could be implemented at any different time. And they could also be brought in and flex in terms of scale and type of facility. So this required, one, a master plan that was highly flexible, but also then a strategy of building that allowed this flexibility into the future. So the strategy that was introduced for these really hard-working buildings was twofold. One was the creation of a modular framework that could be expanded and adapted whilst the different stages are being delivered. And secondly, the organization of cores at the end of each building, which would allow the next stage to work as a plug-and-play building, and therefore allow the different stages to be brought in an adaptable manner, which wasn't constrained by the previous stage. The buildings themselves were designed to be quite data-driven in terms of its performance. So the integration of natural ventilation and a ground source heat pump and highly performative environment allowed a great benefit in terms of energy usage, and it allowed for deconstruction and reusability and adaptability of the space. The real kind of intelligence then of this strategy is that the high levels of data being recorded in the first phases of the building will then be used for the next building. And therefore, the gathering of the data will inform the performance and the design of the next stages. So not only the typology in the system is modular, but it's going to be informed by real live data from the previous iteration. Now, this expansion of living campus integration with urban environment is something that we continue to explore, which has been codified into some of our master planning and design guidelines, such as the Fisherman's Bend Innovation Campus for the University of Melbourne. And it's all building up to this concept that we'd like to explore of the learning city, where education is integrated with infrastructure for transport, business, and community as the heart of the city. So we see a future where the expansion of infrastructure and transport through the city can integrate education and therefore become the heart of the community, and therefore bringing education and learning to the heart of our cities. I'll talk about, in the time that's left, just about regenerative design. And this is obviously not only an imperative driver in the climate emergency that we live in, but it's also a priority in terms of universities, in terms of the longevity and the management of their facilities. The regenerative design has many benefits in the life cycle, and a whole of life analysis of the environments that we design today is really a strategy which is beneficial to a client such as university, which manage and hold their assets for their life and potentially even convert it for future uses. The Monash University Woodside building is obviously quite a well-known and great example of this, where the embodiment of regenerative principles, sustainable principles, supports an environment for learning. And it became with a kind of an ambition to really create something which was completely different and the finding of a very visionary brief. So the brief comes back at being critically important. This is supported by a great engagement process right at the start of the project, which involved a physical and virtual environment for the definition what would be the performance, the function, and the form of the building before any design or briefing started. What emerged from that was obviously the need to create a quite collaborative learning and working environment, which moved away from a stratification of these functions to the creation of an environment which needed to be much more collaborative and interactive for all of those learning communities. Now, to support that, a modular framework was created that allowed different spans and different spatial environments that allowed the functions to exist and be modularized at different scales and different types. The learning were placed at the center, which are the more energy intensive, and therefore they are less reliant on the mechanical systems to control that environment. And then the social spaces are activated and they interact with the learning spaces in the middle. That occurs both in an horizontal manner, but also in the vertical framework. And you can see that the different scales of the buildings coexist and are visually connected throughout the building with the introduction of light into the deep floor plates at different modulars. This creates a series of quite diverse and quite experiential learning landscapes of different scales, different types, and not only for students and staff, but all the visitors that come in for the building, they get to experience and activate the learning at the center of the building. The Passive House certification was achieved by the building, which is quite rigorous in terms of its certification. And the building became the largest Passive House certified education building in the world. Now, the benefits of Passive House, which of course is normally associated with Northern Europe in terms of colder climates, it has to do with a fabric-first approach, which delivers a number of qualities for the indoor environment. This has benefits in terms of health, well-being, but of course, cognitive function, education outcomes, reduced operational costs, and of course, maintenance costs associated with that. There was a predictive design system which was applied from the beginning so that the parameters for the design of the facade and the envelope were determined through different ratios of solid to glazing, G factor, solar radiations, and peak loads. And this allowed the tuning of the facade to the different aspects and functions. So the building delivers facades which of course are adapted to its orientation, which could be quite protective in some of the areas and then really open in others. In that case, having an holistic approach to the envelope allowed the control and the meeting of the criteria for the Passive House. So really considering a holistic approach and the high performance envelope allowed the reduction of the peak loads, allowed the greater efficiency of the mechanical plant, decreased spatial requirements for plant as well, which then allows more space for a solar PV array and more on-site generation. All of that combined brings great benefits and great reductions in the reduction of the operational energy and operational cost. Just the second example on that is the Arizona State University, which is building in a very harsh climate of Arizona State in Phoenix in a very complex and constrained site. And the example here was to bring together a communal space that brought in research, learning, and community at the heart of the building with a series of exhibition and research spaces. The building itself had quite a protective shell, was organized so that it created a protective environment and allowed a quite communal and biophilic internal space. An aquifer runs through the center of the building, and that was used as an opportunity to expose that at the communal heart to not only cool the environment, but also allow the landscape to be created in the center of the building. Rather than creating a fully enclosed atrium, an open courtyard was therefore generated, which was protected by the building and therefore enlivened and supported by the aquifer and the biophilic design. And all of the stairs were made external and obviously increased in its dimensions so they could be used not only as vertical communication, but also as spaces of learning, meeting, and collaboration. And the facade itself, quite adaptive, learning from the environment and adapted to allowing the northern low angle sun to come in, but also protecting from the harsher, higher level sun during peak times. And again, the reduction of operational energy, embodied carbon by the use and reduction of carbon concrete primarily, and the 100% capture of water allow these to have great benefits from an environmental point of view. But it's probably as much time as we can go through today, Parisa.
Fantastic. Jose, would you like to quickly wrap up, or the few more slides? I don't know if we can basically get a few questions. That would be fantastic.
Yes.
Are you happy? Yes, please.
If I could just do a quick conclusion to that. I think what we're trying to demonstrate is that as we're designing these learning environments, we really need to be looking for solutions which are highly adaptable for an environment or requirement that we don't really know what's going to be. So I guess the conclusion from this is what should we be doing at the moment? One, the message is we should really be going back to first principles and thinking about the brief. That's really critical, and that's something that we really enjoyed, and we saw it as really being important. We need to be quite collaborative from the beginning and involving as many stakeholders as possible. We need to be thinking in frameworks for our master plan campus, but also for our buildings and the integration of our systems. So thinking about systems that can be adaptable and integrate engineering and architecture, and that allows the spaces to be much more adaptable and flexible. Thanks, Parisa.
Fantastic. Much appreciated, Jose. I really like the fact that you talked about Grimshaw's broader design philosophy and framework, and then you shared with us all these fascinating projects. Quite clever solutions to design problems, and in all of that, of course, considering climate change and energy efficiency. Perhaps that's why Grimshaw is Grimshaw. Very clever solutions. Okay, I open it to the participants. If anyone has any question, please feel free to type or turn on your microphone, and just Justin, we
Hi,
can't
can you hear me?
hear you.
Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Sorry. Thanks, Jose. That was absolutely brilliant. It's so lovely to see that work. And something I was going to ask, which is probably a slightly sort of odd question, but before I moved to Australia, I lived in Camden for a very long time, and as an architecture student, shopped at Sainsbury's there, and occasionally went to parties in the houses on the canal that Grimshaw's did. And something that always struck me about that building, specifically the houses, was that concept of modularity. And in that context, you get this really kind of poetic relationship to the canal and the idea of commerce and trade. But I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about modularity and that idea of framework as well, and how that actually can sort of enhance the sort of poetic response to sites, because it leaves you that freedom to make very clear sort of metaphorical connections between use and context, but also gives you that, as you say, you're sort of left with effectively kind of an occupiable infrastructure.
Yeah, look, this idea of a framework is something that's ingrained certainly in our thinking, and it really comes from the systems thinking about architecture, engineering, and services. So I saw some of our engineers for B3 and 6 online, and they'll testify to this, that the starting point is really about the brief, the performance of the building, and then how we see, architecture is not disassociated from the engineering, and how we bring all of these elements together to deliver the performative solutions. And you're absolutely right that once you've got the framework in place and it's right, then you're left with quite a lot of ability to then interface with the social side, with the landscape side, with all the different aspects, and the poetic side, as you say, in terms of how you relate to the built environment. So that the process is not additive, it's not an aggregation of constraints, but it's really much more holistic. You put everything on the table, that's a very architectural thing to do, isn't it? But to put that in place, put everything on the table, and then devise the framework that delivers those different priorities. I'm probably saying things that you already know, working as an architect, but you will know that challenges come along through the process that put these things into question. And that's when the robustness of the framework, which started at the beginning, really comes into play. I can tell you that a lot of examples we've gone through this. We're going through that, multiple stages, even in the development B316, where we saw through the development, the brief changes, the requirements change, and then how can we adapt and can we stay within the principle that we've established? And so far, we've been pretty successful at that.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that very much. And I mean, I think probably my first experience of one of Grimshaw's buildings was actually the housing block on up in Regent's Park on sort of
love that.
Park
Yeah.
Road, which is so cool. But it was sort of we represented obviously as a history piece in the history and theory lectures, but it was that sort of that crashing together of the commercial office with the housing, and then the effects of those simple decisions like the curved corner windows, which give you that sort of internal external view, which was completely different to those apartment blocks you get around that area. And so yeah, it's very, very rational, but through being that was incredibly sensuous in that site.
Yeah, no, thank you. I absolutely love that building.
Thanks, Jose, and thanks, Justin. There are a couple of thank you messages for you, Jose. I don't read them, but Francesco mentioned, because it's a longer message, so I'm going to read that for you. Great presentation, a big and impressive journey. Integration as flexible adaptation is delivered with fantastic quality. I would love to speak more about it, but unfortunately I have to go to teach. I hope there are more opportunities in the future. And from PFND, when I was reading this message, I was thinking who from PFND, but I saw Sarv's name. So this question is from Sarv. Hi, Jose. I'd love to hear more about your. Oh, you're here, Sarv. Would you like to turn on your mic?
Yes, I've turned it on. Can you hear me?
Yes, fantastic.
Hi, Jose. That was a great presentation.
Hi.
Thank you. Well, you're familiar with our master planning framework, and it's something that we are working through updating. And I'm really intrigued by the idea that you move away from a static document to an entire spatial framework, and I'd love to hear more about that. And what are the tools that you're recommending we would use to do that? Yeah.
Well, I think first of all, we've had many opportunities to converse, not specifically about these, but obviously converse about particularly B316. I think Curtin as, first of all, a great master plan. I think it's really a fantastic toolkit for the university, which is very complete. And often, I think my experience as well is that it could also become a burden. Not that this is the case, but I worked on myself on master plans where we've gone to a high level of investigation and definition that then later on you found actually that may become a constraint. And obviously the need to then adapt that in a completely different setting and circumstance makes you kind of ask the similar questions later on. Now, I don't have an exact answer to your question, but in terms of flexibility of a master plan, certainly what we're finding is that there are now tools that didn't exist, 5-10 years ago, which are making our work and our ability to respond to these questions in a much more intelligent way. So we certainly have started developing a lot of tools, and this is, something emerging in the last few years that many people are doing, but can assess real time the usage of space and assets in the university, and therefore from that use that data-driven premise to a generative environment which can be quickly adapted. What this means is that potentially, and this is my own thing, is that the master plan becomes much more a set of principles and then a tool which is reusable, and the accessibility of that tool to the mainstream, it's what I think is going to really transform it. So it stops from being a specialized output to something that could be communicated and collaborated with clients and community. So I think in this case, I think the technological advances will allow our master plans to become that much more fluid and flexible from one point of view. And that's something that we're really keen to explore much more.
Fantastic, Jose. Thanks, Sarv. Anyone else has any question? Or I have one, if no one else. Of course, priorities with participants. Okay. No one else? All right. Jose, you talked about future uncertainty and future of war, climate emergency, and of course, cost of living crisis, and the relationship with basically built environment and our work as architects, and of course, AI. So what are your thoughts around the future of built environment, considering the advances that AI is introducing us, and also from the perspective of being an academic, I'm interested in knowing that what happens, in your opinion, to learning in this current AI landscape. What will happen to architecture?
Well, first of all, I don't really fancy your role as an educator in terms of dealing with that. I think the challenges are great for the education system, but also the opportunities are great. They always come side by side, don't they? I think I can probably talk more from a practicing side, first of all. And I think the same I was answering to Sav, I think what we're finding right now is that the specialization of some of those tools, which was a route that we were going down to, kind of highly specialization, has now kind of been left open with the mainstream incorporation of AI. So you find that on a day-to-day basis, and I'm sure a lot of us are doing, we're able to access massive amounts of data and information to assist with our thinking. Now, there's inherent dangers to that, but on the positive side, I can see that that's being used in a much more flexible way. So I'm an optimistic on that side, and we've been using it on a day-to-day basis, particularly in urban frameworks as a tool. That's one side of the generative environment. I think on there's the other side, which is using it as a prompt for creative templates. I think there's pros and negatives and that, but it can be used. I don't think it'll replace the kind of obviously human collaboration and creativity, but I have seen it used, and I've been given experiences where it can actually be something that can be leveraged for conversational discussions and promoting of ideas. But it is changing the way we work. So we feel it on a day-to-day. We now work differently because of those technologies. How that will come to learning, who knows?
That remains as a question, I guess. This is, a topic, a very hot topic amongst us as well. So I guess we need to embrace it. Again, how? That's what we need to work on. Okay, fantastic. Anyone else has any question? I think we're quite on time. Justin, many thanks again, Jose and Parisa. No worries. It was a great presentation and discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thanks, Jose. I'm sure we'll be in touch again. So hopefully we'll have some opportunities, for further collaboration along the way. Now that you are with us at Curtin, I guess at least for a few years. When does the project finish? Well, when is the completion date?
Somewhere in 2026, I believe.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. That's great. Again, thank you so much for your time, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Oh, what do I do? I'm not sure how to leave.
I guess you just close the window.
Oh, right, of course. That makes sense.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So much content, Parisa.
Sorry.
Sorry about so much content. There's a whole section I couldn't go through, including B316.
That was really brilliant. And the way you manage time, I think it was pretty good. You are a very skillful presenter, much better than us, I guess, educators, because we tend to talk a lot. But I guess it was, yeah, pretty good. No, we didn't go over time. And I guess people, because we recorded, you just reminded me I need to stop recording.